Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Today I have the great pleasure of welcoming back to the channel Micah Dank and Malik Jabbar. And today we're going to do something very different. These two gentlemen have never met before. This is the first time they're meeting and speaking with each other. And coming from Islam, Malik, and coming from a Judaic background, Micah, the fact that both of you have left your respective religions and you are avid astrotheologists, I'd like to jump straight into a number of questions. So just so we can get the premise right for the conversation, do either of you see any literalism or historicity in the Bible?
Well, I would say yes, to a certain extent. I would say that the literal aspect in the Bible would be cultural. And it would aid us in having some rudimentary. I mean, if not extended knowledge of the culture in order to help us understand the Bible. But I don't want to be too lengthy on this, but I want to make this point, a point that will help explain what I'm saying. The Bible, the ancient Hebrews were nomadic people. Shepherds, and they had no stable city home, but rather they traveled from place to place with according to the weather and other needs. Therefore, they had and we're speaking in terms of not just the Hebrews, but all the nomadic tribes of that area. And in terms of how they handled their policing of each other and how they handled their justice system, each tribe handled it on their own. There was no police station to go to. There was no sitting government to go to. Each tribe was its own government. And I'm not going to talk too extensively on that, but I'm going to go right to my point. For that reason, whenever the members of a tribe were offended, it was up for the tribe itself to bring justice by going against the other tribe that offended them for whatever crime was committed, whether it be a rape or a theft or minor or major. Okay, to exemplify this cultural connection, there's a portion in the Old Testament of the Bible where it talks about the old law of Moses, a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye if you're offended. And we in our culture, we adopt that to mean something in regards to retaliation, as opposed to what we find in the New Testament, Jesus saying, turn the other cheek. But if we are familiar with the culture of the nomadic people, and that justice was something that each tribe executed on their own, we find that in the culture, this axiom, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, it was not a rally toward retaliation, but rather it was a limit within their culture that they was putting on retaliation. Because since they carried the police enforcement and justice on their own, when a tribe was offended, they would go against another tribe to remedy the solution, but a minor scrape over a minor theft, it could develop into all-out war without limitations. So they developed a maximum an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, saying if your tribe is offended, limit your retaliation to remedy that offense. Let us not let our retaliation be extended so we are at constant, unending war with each other. So my point is, in referring to your point about the literal aspect of the Bible, if one is not familiar somewhat with the Judaic or the nomadic culture, a passage like that, which has a literal significance and a true significance, we will apply it to our own culture, whatever it is, and have a complete misinterpretation of what it actually means. So yeah, there's some cultural truth, I believe, some literal truth, I believe, in the Bible, along cultural lines.
Micah?
Yeah. So from my research, have you ever heard when they come out with a movie, the saying that they put at the beginning of it that says based on a true story? Do you know why they have to do that? They have to do that because they change things. Okay, they change a lot of things. Okay, the Bible itself was never meant to be taken literally. Okay, for example, okay, the Egyptians kept meticulous records of their work. Okay, even the non-flattering stuff, they kept meticulous records of their work. Okay, and in their work, there is zero mention, not one mention, of the Jews coming from there, of the 10 plagues, of Moses, of the sea. Okay, in fact, the Bible is not original because Moses gets his name from Tuthmosis, and he is basically just supposed to be Akhenaten in the New Age. Okay, Akhenaten, who in 1367 BC unified everybody under a solar deity, and it never evolved since then. Okay, Christianity tried to make it that the man that walked on earth was God, whereas in the past, all the gods were in heaven, whereas that's not the case. Okay, he's being the son. You can talk about the 10 Commandments going back to the Egyptian Book of the Dead and something called the 42 positive affirmations of Ma'at. If you were to look at chapter 125 of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, you would find that 3 of the 10 commandments are literally right there out in the open, if you've ever done that. So they do draw their information from there, but it's interesting too, because the Bible, if the Jews came from Egypt, okay, why is there zero mention of the pyramids or the Sphinx in the Bible? Also, the Egyptians revered cats and women because women were portals to bring life into the world. Okay, they revered cats and women's cats because they could see into the afterlife, and women because they brought that in. When you get to the Jewish portion of the Old Testament, okay, suddenly women become secondary citizens because of sin, and there's zero mentions of cats in the Bible. Okay, but things like Noah's Ark, okay, that goes back to a Sumerian story, the flood. Everyone has a flood story. I mean, literally to the same thing, where in the Sumerian story, he sends out a raven, it comes back with a branch. It's the same thing. It's literally ripped from it word for word. People aren't just putting the dots together. So could these stories have been based off things? Yes. Are they divine? No, they're not divine. Nothing about it's as Jordan Maxwell used to say, the only thing holy about the books are the stories themselves. They're full of holes. That's what he used to say. And the Bible was never meant to be taken literally. Before 325 AD, okay, when Constantine united everything in Christianity, the earliest Christians were known as Helionostics, okay? And in Greek, helios means sun, and gnosis means knowers. They were sun worshippers. Okay, even further back than that, in the year 100 AD, they had something called the Synod of Jamnia. Okay, and the Synod of Jamnia, they basically got a bunch of politicians and a bunch of rabbis together because in 100 AD, believe it or not, the Old Testament wasn't even canonized. See, what you don't realize is the book of Job is actually the oldest book in the Bible. It predates the book of Genesis, but it's not in that order in the book. because what happened is in 100 AD, they put all these books together in order. Now, something interesting happened in 100 AD too, because about 30 years prior to this conference that they did in Jamnia in Israel, okay, what happened was the book of Mark came out. And during this synod of Jamnia, they actually deliberated whether or not to include the book of Mark into the Old Testament or make it part of a New Testament. That was their purpose. Okay, so it has had hands on it. We could talk about the fact that the letter J wasn't invented until 1524 or 1534, I should say. And the Jesuits came out in 1524. So names like Jesus, Yeshua, Jonathan, Yonatan, Joshua, the J used to be the Y. Okay, so these new names that were put together in 1611 by King James, who was gay, by the way. King James, who was gay, by the way, put this together. And it's also not original. Like, they talk about homosexuality being a sin, but they don't want to tell you that King David was bisexual. They don't tell you things like that, even though it's in there. That when Sir Francis Bacon and them tried to put together the Bible in 1611, it's just been changed so much. Now, the interesting thing too is people always come at me and they say, you're using modern day translation, right? You're using English translation. Have you read it in the ancient Hebrew? And the first thing I say is, yes, I have. But the other thing I say is, when I translate astrotheology, you're looking for animals to constellation connections, mostly. That's like a good 70% of it. Okay, the words they're changing, I'll give you an example. So in the Old Testament, it says thou shalt not murder, whereas in the King James Bible, it comes out and says thou shalt not kill. There is a big difference, because you can kill an animal, you can't murder an animal, right? So those are the kind of words that translate that people argue about, but it's irrelevant when you're dealing with astrotheology, because the name of the animals is not what's being translated. So just wanted to share that.
So sticking to the topic of literalism, and I've looked at both of your respective works on Jesus and the literalism of the Jesus character. Now, there are some academics who say that Jesus was a real historic person, and they have a number of different Jesuses that they wish to make this claim based on. How do you see the composition of this Jesus character, especially as how you see it through astrological eyes?
Well, the academics, they want to have it both ways about Jesus. And it's a complete ruse. It's a stratagem, in my opinion. Because what they say across the board in academia, they say that the biblical Jesus is legendary. It's not true. They will admit that these miracles and so forth didn't happen and so forth. But then they say he is based on a true Jesus that is lost in history. And we say, well, what about this true Jesus? They say, well, no, we can't find him because the followers of Jesus, they were so extravagant in their writing concerning Jesus that they obliterated the true Jesus. So we can never find him, but he did exist. But the biblical Jesus, he's legendary. He's not completely real, but the Gospels are based on reality. That's like the old thing, having your cake and eating it too. They put you in a situation, whereas when you challenge the existence of the Jesus of the Bible, they say, no, we admit he didn't exist. but they won't. But he didn't exist as far as the biblical Jesus goes. That Jesus didn't exist. But yeah, there was a Jesus, and when we asked him to prove the existence of the other Jesus, oh, we can't do that. He's lost in history. So it's a ruse. It's a stratagem that academia does. But we in astrotheology, we say that the Gospels reflect sun worship, and the Jesus is a symbol of the sun, and we can go into the Bible and bring out analogies to prove that. So I mean,
Right.
that's the difference.
Yeah. See, the thing is that they call him Jesus Christ. Now, I literally just got telling you that there's no way his name was Jesus because J didn't exist until 1534. Okay. So his name would have been Yeshua Ben Yosef or Yeshua Ben Pandera, depending on who you talk to. Okay. But he is basically a solar deity. There's a lot that doesn't add up. The wall, okay, that the Jews pray to, the Western Wall, they call it the Wailing Wall, okay, is actually an old Roman fortress, okay? It's not actually from a temple. It's from something called Fortress Antonia, which was right around that time period. See, what they do is they conflate history and this. Do you remember? So you've seen my work where I talk about how when the sun is in Aquarius, he's the son of man. When the sun's in Pisces, he's the fisherman of men and all that. Well, he's also, you have Gemini the twins. He was also known as a twin, right? With James, right? He was known as a twin. And you'll find mentions of James in archaeology. You will. But what you'll never do is, you remember the guy who was it King Henry or someone that they dug up under a supermarket in the UK a couple of years back? Right? It was. So you'll never find the Ark. You'll never find any of the bones of these people. You'll never find the femur of King Solomon. I talk about how Solomon is three words for the sun: Sol, Om, and On. It's three words for it, and you'll never find any historical evidence, because the second you would, it would be all over the world. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what it would. And you're never going to find any of this historic evidence. You're never going to find like Samson's hair. You're never going to find like Goliath's bones. You're never going to find this, because these are characters. These are allegories. These are Jungian archetypes that are placed there to tell stories. That's what they are. And that's all that it is. Moses talks about, at one point, I don't know, Malik, if you remember this, but Moses talks about at one point that like the Jews started to rebel against him because he was in the desert for a while and they got annoyed. They wanted to go back to Egypt and get food and live there again. And serpents came out of the ground and started biting them, and they all fell down and a lot of them died. And then they begged Moses. They said, please go talk to God, and heal us, save us. So Moses goes in his tent, he talks to God, and what does God tell him to do? He says, take a staff and wrap a snake around it, and anyone who looks at it will come to life and be spared. Well, what is the snake around the staff? In the Greeks at the same time period, it's the rod of Asclepius. It's the caduceus that we have now. It's the kundalini. These are esoteric sciences that the Bible is made of. It was never meant to be taken literally, and all the problems come from taking this stuff literally.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of the problems that come from taking the Bible literally, something as a child I've always had an issue with, and even up till today is playing out real time in the news and in politics, is the literal interpretation of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and the fact that these three individuals, you're quite familiar with the modern day interpretation of how these races came to be from these three individuals. Now, given that the flood, you've clearly made mention that the flood came from an older Sumerian epic. Talk to us about the dangers of the literalism of this particular story and how we see it playing out today.
Yeah, exactly. And the most important thing that anyone involved in reading the Bible or studying monotheism can recognize, I believe, is as Micah mentioned, the Bible is literature. I think that's the number one thing that has to be understood. And I tell you, it's difficult for me to understand why so many ostensibly intelligent people take the Bible literally. Because when you think about the things you have to believe actually happened, I mean, the Garden of Eden saga, I mean, the Jonah thing, I can't think of them, all the various impossible miracles that are in the Bible. I mean, animals talk in the Bible. There's so much. So when you take the Bible literally, you're saying all this is true. And if you negate certain parts of the Bible and say, well, this may be exaggerated, but the other is true, we get into a big mishmash. By what yardstick are we going to determine what is true and what is not in a way that everybody can agree upon it? The best thing is to understand that the Bible is literature. But in regards to the Noah saga, but the Bible, and like Micah mentioned, the Judaism is a much younger organized religion than we realize, because it kind of developed concurrently with Christianity. In terms of their canon coming together, as he mentioned, actually in this era, it's much younger than we expect, than we have suspected, I should say. But when I look at the Bible literature, I look at it in terms of at least three divisions. We know that a lot of the literature of the Bible, where it did not come from the same philosophical sources or religious sources, there were different of opinions among the nomads, the Hebrews, however we want to call them.
It's almost as if you're comparing people's handwritings together, because their flow, their cadence, how they tell the story, depending on what ancient text you're reading from the Bible, it's not written like one person wrote the whole thing. You can clearly hear differences in people throughout the books.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see that the two forces, well, mostly they speak of the Yahwehs and the Elohists, they contributed, but there was an editor who came and brought these compilations together and put both sources within the Bible. And this is one reason, like, we run into what we think are contradictions, like there are two creation stories, whereas God creates Adam and Eve, then another one whereas he creates Adam and later on Eve. It's not actually contradiction in the term of one source creating writing two different versions. They are different sources brought together.
And then if you throw Kabbalah into the mix, you have the story of Adam Kadmon, who predates Adam, who's the basic, the prototype for the human race. I don't know if you've ever gotten into Kabbalah before, but that's basically there's an original Adam that's not Adam.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, and actually, I'm going to be looking into your books, without doubt, But like another contradiction I would mention that people consider a contradiction about the story of Noah. You find that in one portion of the Bible, it says that the animals were saved by going into his ship 2 by 2. In another chapter, it says they went in 7 by 7. People consider that a contradiction. it would be a contradiction if it came from a single source. I'm trying to emphasize the point that the Bible is made up of separate sources brought together by an editor. My point is, both versions are true. I mean, astrologically, they come from different time frames, according to my research. Astrologically, we can show you, as Micah said, not literally, there were no two animals, there were no seven animals. But astrologically, we can show you the correlations, whereas the 2 by 2 is true, and we can also see where the 7 and 7 is true. But these contradictions can only be cleaned up through symbolism, not through literalism.
Right. Malik, what the religious Christians will do, because I've had many conversations with a lot of them. One of my best friends, who I'm no longer friends with anymore after 30 years, because of what I do, is a born-again Christian, and I basically grew up with him my whole life. He makes the argument that the reason that Jesus says 4 separate things at the end of each gospel is because 4 separate people were there. And he claims it's like the game of telephone. Like if I whisper in your ear a word, and then you whisper it to Eso, and then Eso whispers it to me, it could be a different word when it finally comes here. So he said he actually appreciates that there's 4 different explanations at the end, because it sounds like 4 different people are just writing what they heard.
Yeah, and one thing about Christians and about the clergy, they are in defense of their belief systems, regardless of what. So they're not open to any modification or adjustments according to reality or according to facts, but they will reinterpret. So whenever you come up with up to them in an argument about something that could not actually be true, just as with the creation of the world in 6 days, that was accepted literally years ago by some. But like when that became unacceptable because of the advancing intellect of the population, I think they went to, a day with God is 1,000 years. Then they go to periods. They just continually reinterpret in order to maintain allegiance to a basic belief that really has failed them in this modern world. And I don't mean to speak in condemnation of Christians, in this way. I hate to get into an adversarial thing where as condemning of faith and so forth, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or any other, because believe it or not, and I wish you hold your point a minute, Mike, I want you to come on, but I see a benefit in religion in helping people get through life, because, but now with monotheism and so forth, I believe it's too exploitative, and that it does more harm than good to society because of the way it's constructed. But the idea of people having a religion, whether it's true or not, to me, truth is a moving target. I don't see getting to a point we got the truth and this is it. Truth, it changes as we evolve, because truth really is a perspective, as I see it. But I just want to say that in regards to religion, for people to have a religion, and even if it's, even if we can find flaws in it, to me, the most important aspect in a person's life is not the destination, it's the path, it's to be on the right path. That's why, like I said in a previous interview, my guiding light is rational thought. Because even if I make mistakes on the way, if my general path is governed by a set system of logic, I still feel okay. But if you're on the wrong path religiously, no matter how sincere you are, all your prayers and your devotion to a God that doesn't exist, you know, it's like crap down the toilet, to excuse, my metaphor, you know. But religion, even if it has flaws in it, if we can develop a religion that's at least on the right path, I think it would be beneficial. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Go ahead.
I think the key to this all is to get rid of religion. I think religion is beyond saving. I think that for the 10 Commandments, for example. So I'm gonna go outside because it's just too hot in my house.
Okay.
All right. If you're talking about the 10 Commandments, if God actually, now again, I've mentioned the fact that it comes from the Egyptian works. However, if Moses was given the 10 Commandments and God really had a chance, he could have said, no child abuse. Women and men are equal. There's so many things that God could have done instead of making 4 of the commandments about him being needed to worship. It's really one of the most wasted opportunities you could ever think, is by giving everyone these 10 commandments, and they're not really as beneficial as they seem to be. Now, your question, Esso, was about Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Okay? So remember, Adam and Eve had 2 kids, Cain and Abel. Okay? The symbolism. Okay? There. The word spear. Okay? I've translated in my work to mean Sagittarius, the man with the bow and the arrow, or the spear. Okay? There are 2 murders that happen in the Bible. The 2 most important murders, you could argue, that happen in the Bible is Jesus, number 1, and he's hit with the spear of destiny to check to see if he's dead. And then you have Cain and Abel, the first murder. Okay, what begets to it all? Well, Cain in Hebrew means spear. Okay, so the 2 most important murders involve a spear. Okay, so they're telling you something there. Now, the other thing that they're going to tell you is that Cain had basically the scarlet letter, and he went off and he knew his wife from another tribe. Where did they come from? Okay, it's the same thing with Ham, Japheth, and Shem, right? What did they do? They covered their drunk father with a blanket in a cave. Okay, they made that part of the story very important, and then they send themselves off to basically procreate with it. Where did these people come from? You know, and then the religious use something called apologetics, which is how they describe that there's talking animals, which is how they describe all this fantastical stuff happened. That's basically what they use, because they have to use it. That's a breakdowns of religions has to go to apologetics, and there's some very famous ones. However, there's just, you have to realize, it just, the more you look into it, you have to realize is that it was never meant to be taken literally. At no point was this book ever taken literally in the past. One of my favorite quotes is from a guy called John Dominic Crossan. Okay, and what he says is a very poignant quote. He says, it's not that the ancients told literal stories and we're now smart enough to take them symbolically, but that they told them symbolically and we are now dumb enough to take them literally.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the facts. That's just the facts of it. That's what it is.
Yeah. And you know, I would like to augment one point on my previous statement. And I'm stimulated to do so by a good comment, you know, that was made by Micah there. Is that regarding religion, the concept of religion in terms of a God king, I don't see any way for that advancing within the age of Aquarius myself. That concept, that you know,
right,
try to individualize God in any form. I believe as we go forward within the age of Aquarius, that would dissipate, that would go away. And although people living in the present they see the present as eternity, regardless of what age. So people are accustomed to thinking in terms of God as a God King, and so those who haven't studied the matter think that it's always been that way. But that idea, with the intellect of the world advancing as it is, I just see no way for
you
that.
should send him my video that we did of what's God.
I will. Now you've touched on the topic of an age. For those not familiar, can you talk to us about, you said that we are entering the age of Aquarius. What exactly is an age, and what's the significance of an age changing its zodiac reference?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's you want to go first on that, Micah?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So you guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
All right. Here's how it is, and here's how I break it down. This goes back to the ancient times. Okay. In the age of Leo, which was 12,000 years ago, okay, the constellation Leo was what the Sphinx was facing. The Sphinx being the lion. It was facing that. Okay. Now, during the age of Gemini and Taurus, right at that edge, that's when the pyramids were built, because they mimic Orion's belt, which sits between Gemini and Taurus. Okay. Then in the age of Taurus, the Egyptian people are the main people that are ruling. They show you tons of hieroglyphs of the sun with the between the bull's horns. They show you tons of hieroglyphs. There was the age of Taurus. That was bull worship. The Jews come around in the age of Aries, which is ram worship. That's why they blow the ram's horn to the sky. Okay. In Pisces, Jesus comes around. Okay. Jesus is the Piscean solar deity. That's why he feeds the masses with 2 fish on the mound. Pisces is the 2 fish. Okay. Now we're in the age of Aquarius. Okay. And if you look at it, they're trying to combine Christianity and Islam. And they're trying to open a one world religion in Jerusalem, prefaced by the slaughter of a perfect red heifer. Okay. That has to be combed and make sure it doesn't have any white or gray hairs. Okay. But that's bull worship. Okay. They tell you about this in Exodus, Malik. Moses goes to the mountain, and he, while he's up there, it's a volcano. It's a mountain. It's a volcano. Okay. And the mountain was called Sinai. Well, Sinai is 2 Sumerian words, sin, which means moon god. Okay, that's where the word sin comes from. It does not mean to miss the mark. It does not mean something that you do to begrudge someone. Okay, it means moon god. And Ai, which means mountain. It was the mountain of the moon god, because Moses went up there. They saw the moon coming up behind it, and that's where they thought it was. Incidentally, also, it was a volcano, and volcanoes make a lot of thundering noise. The word for thunder in Hebrew translates to voices. So they would literally think that the mountain, God was literally talking to Moses up there, and the moon god would come up behind it. It's all astrology. Now, he comes down and he sees them worshiping a golden calf. Well, the gold is the sun, and the calf is the bull. They were worshiping the wrong time period. They're the people of Aries. These people, the elites that rule everything, okay, they completely control the narrative as far as the ages go. And now, what is an age? Okay, it's called the precession of the equinox, because in the zodiac you go Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, whereas in the precession of the equinoxes you go backwards. Okay, so we have evidence that they worshipped the constellation Leo because of the Sphinx. We have that, and it was facing that. Okay. In fact, they're supposed all sphinxes were actually, all things were made in duality there. There should be a second sphinx facing the original sphinx. And if it's excavated during this time period, that one will be facing the age of Leo, and the other one will be facing Aquarius, because they're opposing signs. Okay, so it all makes sense if you think about it. Now, when you're talking about an age, it's a 2160-year period. Okay. And we're entering Aquarius right now, which is the sign of the man. It's going to be the building of the man, of humanity. Or in a negative connotation, it's going to be merging with machines. That's going to be the new topic. That's going to be the new topic that they're pushing. Depopulation, merging with machines. You had the lion, okay? Then you had in Gemini and Taurus, you had Orion's belt. That's when they built the pyramids in Giza. Then you have the bulls in the age of Taurus. You have the rams in Aries, the Jews with the ram's horn. You have the two fish in Pisces with Christianity. And now you're in Aquarius. We're too young in the age of Aquarius to really see what it's going to turn into. But if this stuff doesn't get exposed, you know, in 2,000 years, there's going to be a story about a goat. It's just what's going to happen, because Capricorn is the next sign, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And you know that I believe that we're living in an axial age now, as the historians call it, whereas this synthesis of knowledge from the various realms is coming together, and it's really laying the groundwork for a new world, you know. And as Micah said, it's early, so it's difficult to see, you know, like from my perspective, you know, with the age of Aquarius, you know, I certainly don't see a continuation of a God King concept. And
no,
I actually,
Christianity has served its purpose. That's why it's allowed to be attacked in the media, because it served its purpose.
Yeah, right. It served its purpose. And it's interesting, you know, we can't find a beginning to this system of astrology and them tracking the ages. We can't find the beginning of this. And so this has been going on. And the powers that be have been leaving these symbols going back thousands and thousands of years, indicating that they have been judging time by these areas that we call astrological ages, which span 2,160 years. And really, you get into kind of mysticism with it, in a sense. When I say mysticism, I mean into an undefined area, because there has been, we can see there has been a correlation of changes in the mode and manner of society with the ages.
Yes.
So the point comes up. I mean, exactly why is that? Is it the ages bringing about the changes? Is it the society?
Well, I trace it
instigated. Go ahead.
I trace it back. I've traced it personally back to. Have you heard of the Lascaux caves in France?
No.
So there are these caves in Lascaux, France. They're called the Lascaux caves because they're in Lascaux. So you've heard this before. And these Lascaux caves, okay, they had some teenagers that went to the back of them, okay? And when they went into the back, they saw a bunch of
Micah, you're cracking up.
bulls, a bunch of example. Oh, is this better?
Keep talking, I'll tell you.
Hold on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I hear you now. Yeah.
So they. Okay, sorry. I don't know why I'm not having signal outside. So they carbon dated the wall, and it came out to 17,000 years. Now, a lot of Christians, what they'll tell you is that carbon dating is inaccurate. That's what they'll tell you when you're talking about the young Earth Christians. They'll say carbon dating is inaccurate. They're actually half correct about that, but they're not. Okay, carbon-14 dating is extraordinarily accurate up to 50,000 years, but beyond that, it's just a guesstimate based on half-life. Okay, there's other uranium datings, there's other types of carbon datings that they use. But what they did was they dated the wall to 17,000 years. Then what they did is they brought in an astrologer with a computer who rewound the sky back 17,000 years in Lascaux. And when they printed it out, they superimposed it on the cave, all the constellations lined up. So this seems to be the number one science that the ancients keep trying to hand down. And again, this is people who are supposedly in the food chain, okay, that have studied the stars for enough time to know solstices and equinoxes. And also, the interesting thing is that on the summer solstice, June 21st, the cave that they were in, and only on that one day, the summer solstice, the sun actually went to the back of the cave and illuminated the wall.
Wow.
Okay, so it was a man-made cave. It was a man-made cave, and they actually knew this stuff. So there is that information out there. Okay. Now, the Lascaux caves you can't visit anymore because they've shut them down. Because what they say is the carbon dioxide from your breath is ruining the walls. But they just don't want people to look into this. And there is an easy way to know what age we're in, because a lot of people argue what age we're in, right? What you do is you go down to the equator and you watch the sunrise on the spring solstice, on the spring equinox. Okay. The sun rises up against the sign. There's a sign behind the sun. On the spring equinox, the sun rises. There's a sign behind it. That sign behind it on that day, okay, that's the age we're in. And that's how we tell. Okay. They don't even hide it before, because, you have your equator, and then what do you have on either side? You have the Tropic of Cancer, Cancer being the top, and the Tropic of Capricorn, which is at the very bottom. They don't even hide this stuff. They tell you this.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So and right, in the Bible, in the name of Jesus, and whereas it's forecast about the end of the world, that's the way they interpret it. But of course, actually saying the end of the era.
Yes, era, eon, the end of the age.
Right. The end of the age. That is really what is forecast.
Yeah.
And so, we are living in a unique time, because we're living at the turn of the ages. And
you know what I say, Malik? I actually wrote this in my first book. I said, we are the only people, and I've done the math, 50,000 years in the past and 50,000 years in the future. We are the only group of people that saw the change of a century, a millennium, and a zodiac sign. Okay, that will never happen again. Okay, so it's very powerful.
Yeah, right, yeah. I did all that.
And we speak about mythology. Talk to us about what are the factors that actually motivated the ancients to create and record these myths in the first place.
You mean as far as the ancient holy texts?
Yes.
So the reason they encoded it is for the same reason that the Bibles used to be in Latin, that they were chained to the pews, that people weren't educated and they were given slips of interpretations, just like the priest still does in church, okay, where he tells you what to think about it. Okay. The reason they did this is because it encoded. See what astrology does, okay, or what astrotheology does in a nutshell, with all the codes and connections that can be made that I've been doing, okay, is it maps out the heavens. What it is, to put it bluntly, is let's think about it like this. When do you get all your stuff done? When are you going to write a letter to your friend? When are you going to go to the mail? When are you going to go to the doctor? You're going to go in the daytime, right? You're not going to go at night. Okay. So when the sun came up, it gave warmth, things grew. It was the most important thing in the world. Okay. Now, before there was air pollution and light pollution, you could see the stars perfectly. Okay. So the ancients would look at the stars. They would notate it on specific days because they didn't have calendars, watches, clocks, smartphones. They didn't have any of that. They had like sundials. That's all they had. Okay. So what they did was, remember how in Game of Thrones when they'd say winter is coming, and it was like a big popular line. It was like a big joke. But that was true. That's what it was. Like winter was coming. And if you didn't see the bowl in the sky during the right time and put a plow on it and plant the seeds so you can harvest for the bread in Virgo and harvest for the wine and the olives in Libra, you weren't going to eat in the winter. Okay. They worked off dream interpretations. This is the oldest encoded Farmer's Almanac. Okay. And it's encoded because it was sacred information that they didn't want to get out, because that's what happens with wisdom. Okay. Jesus says this. Jesus says for people with eyes to see and ears to hear. And then he constantly chastises his disciples. He says, why do you not realize I'm not talking about bread? He talks astrotheologically to them all the time, and they just have no idea. But that's basically what it is. Any of these ancient holy books, all it does is it shows you patterns in the constellations. It explains the animals and where they are. You know, the zodiac tells you what to do. It's a farmer's almanac, okay, in one aspect. And that was survival back then, because we can look at a TV and know what the weather is the next day. They couldn't do that.
And you know, that speaks to motivation, and people, they had to follow the heavens. They had to interact with nature in order to survive. And like the cosmos itself, as it circulates around us, circles around us, you know, it's a clock, you know, that can inform people as to when to plant, when to harvest, when to migrate, or what have you. You know, but beyond that, they developed the 12 ages, and you know, during, well, we know the cycle of precession, 25,920 years. That's a basic cycle.
It's called the Great Year.
The Great Year. But besides our annual seasons, this world, it is subject to great upheavals. And it's my belief, according to my understanding of astrotheology, that these people also, that different eras, we talked about different eras bringing about various social changes and so forth, but there are indications also that different eras bring about geological and physical changes on our planet. And that, you know, speaking to motivation, which you asked about, Mike, I think that really the motivation, it was definitely for the basics of planting and harvesting and so forth, but also the tracking of the various upheavals that develop on our planet. Some of them come with regularity that can be analyzed by the cosmic positions, you know. And you know, now I give you just one analogy of this. There's talking nowadays about climate change and about the melting of the polar caps and so forth. But now, actually, I remember reading decades ago that the geologists claim that they've been tracing the ice age going back 2 million years. And that for this 2 million year span, the interaction between the ice cap being dispersed throughout the lower latitudes and being contracted back into the area of the pole, they say that for only 15% of that time has the polar caps been in existence. For the other 85%, the ice has been dispersed throughout the lower latitudes. You know, so this is so what we're living now, the period that we're living in now, we take for granted that it is the norm, but it is not the norm, according to the world's own scientists, you know. And we can see, whereas the geologists also tell us that some mountains ranges that exist now were once under the sea, you know. So this world goes through terrific upheavals and changes. It does not remain the same, you know. And really, another point that verifies that or augments that idea is the variety of races. I mean, why are there so many varieties? We know that it's adaptations to their environment. You know, this is another indication that the world has gone through tremendous changes in the environment. My point is, astrotheology and the establishment of ages and keeping such studious to monitor this situation of the change of the ages, you know, so studiously, they were doing it, you know, as, according to my understanding, I mean, for our survival. You know, when you're able to coordinate and you have that knowledge, it's not a public knowledge. That's what we get into the esoteric part of this. It's not a public knowledge. But yeah, I believe that there are correlations between the stars and the constellations and so forth, and certain conditions that affect our planet, you know, and I really can go to it extensively, but we don't have time for that. And I wouldn't want to discuss it extemporaneously anyway. But I think astrotheology is not just something to do. I'm very, very certain that it's this knowledge is important for our survival as a species. I'm very sure of that.
Malik Jabbar, Micah Dank, thank you for joining us today on Esoteric Thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy.